Today I was browsing through Waterstones, which is a well-known bookstore chain here in the UK, and I was going through the history section, and I came across a book written by a Chinese writer on so-called black jails. That is the specific jails that are used by the Communist Party to punish dissidents, ostensibly under um, crimes against the state. I didn't look at the book in great detail, but I got the general idea of what it was about. Um, it got me thinking about something. Got me thinking about the fact that such a book would not be available in China, and I know that because I've been to China. I know how the censorship works over there. I want to talk a little bit about the nature of communism, specifically Chinese communism, and frankly, why I have such contempt the nature of covering up their past. Um, I've never ever been a fan of communism. I've always found it one of the most distasteful, cruel, blood-soaked ideologies there is. I mean, you could say fascism, capitalism, colonialism, of course, all have a dark history, but there's something about communism that I find particularly odious, and I'm thinking particularly about Chinese communism, and that is the whitewashing of history. Um, I just find that despicable. I mean, there is basically the situation, and you see it in the modern Chinese state, of profound arrogance, and it is this very thin-skinned sort of attitude that we are above criticism. No one can criticize us, and if outsiders do, then we'll play the victim. And you see this all the time. I mean, when the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was asked about human rights in Canada, he basically got into a rant about internal affairs and all the usual excuses. Now, the point about that was the journalist wasn't attacking him personally. He took it very personally, even though her question was not, it was nothing against him, Mr. Yi. It was just a general question. I think it's interesting because the thing is, in China, there is no free media at all. Now, there's been a lot of talk recently about fake news and bias in the media and so on. I'm going to be covering that in another video. But the point about the People's Republic of China is that all media is entirely controlled by the state. Entirely. In the West, media is biased and it might support one political party or another. It might be left wing or right wing. But you can't really say that media outlets like the BBC, CNN, Fox are controlled by the government. If anything, it's the other way around. In China, there is no independent journalism, or at least if there is, they're taking a real risk. Therefore, Chinese journalists will never really put senior Politburo members on the spot because they can't. So I think Wang Yi had his tantrum because he wasn't used to it. He wasn't used to being questioned. Um, to me, it was profoundly arrogant. And I had a whole thing with that because I defended the journalists and a bunch of nationalists attacked me. And it got quite ugly, actually. They ended up hacking my account and, well, it got restored. But that just shows the petty nature of some of these people. By these people, I'm talking about hardcore nationalists. Because this is the thing. My experience of overseas Chinese, I have to say, by the way, I've had very good experiences with a lot of Chinese people. So I don't want people to think of being xenophobic here. That's not the issue. I have met some of the most generous, open-minded, and decent people I've ever met have been Chinese citizens. But I do find that there is generally two camps. Firstly, there are those who are sort of ambivalent and they tend to avoid confrontations, and in some cases they actually concede and they agree that there is an issue at play here with history being censored. But then there is another group who get very nationalistic and defensive, and they basically toe the Communist Party line. And the funny thing about these people is they get really annoyed if you accuse them of being stooges of the CCP, and yet they do nothing to counter that stereotype. They do nothing to counter that perception. So if you, for example, um, say that you are acting like a CCP stooge, they say, "Oh, not everything's about the government. This is just my opinion." But they don't realize that by going out of their way to defend the government, that is exactly how they come across. And to be honest, it pisses me off because I think, especially, it's one thing doing it when they're in China, but I think when they are living in the UK or Australia or Canada or wherever, to push that very aggressive nationalism, I think, is incredibly arrogant. I mean, imagine the situation if you have Westerners going to China and talking about how perfect America was or how perfect Britain was. I mean, it would be seen as arrogant because it would be arrogant. What really annoys me is they will always turn it around and they will always say, "Oh, but you British done this, you Americans done that," and they will always talk about issues like the Opium Wars and how China was humiliated in the 19th century. But far closer to our time was the crimes of Chairman Mao, and yet this guy is still held up as some sort of savior. Now, the most common argument for that is that, oh, but the Chinese population increased in his time, oh, therefore he must have been a good guy. Doesn't matter that upwards of 50 million, some sources say 70 million people died, oh, but the population increased. That's a bit like saying, well, okay, the robber goes into a shop and shoots one person, but hey, another person comes into the shop 5 minutes later, and another person. Therefore, there's more people in the shop. So never mind that one guy that got shot. It's this callous indifference to human suffering that is very noticeable with communist mentality. Um, and it's always whataboutery. It's always about, oh, you the West on this, the West on that. Here's the fundamental difference, and this is a very important point. The West has got a lot of blood on its hands, no question about it. But you can go into a British bookshop. I'll use my country. I'm sure this is the same in the US and Canada and other Western countries, but I'll just use the UK as an example. I guarantee you can go into Waterstones or any British bookstore or British library or British university for that matter, and you can learn about crimes committed by the British Empire, i.e., the Amritsar massacre. I challenge Chinese nationalists to claim that they can do the same thing with the Communist Party, i.e., to go into a Chinese bookstore or Chinese library and read about the crimes of Chairman Mao. I'll tell you what they do get. They get absolute propaganda. They get brainwashing from an early age. Now, this term brainwashing might be contentious, but when you have children being taught that all the Chinese people love Chairman Mao, what else can you call it? When you get schools specifically designed for promoting and instilling nationalism in the minds of 5 year olds, that by definition is brainwashing. This is not to say that all the Chinese people today are mindless ants who just, mindlessly salute Chairman Mao. It isn't like that. I've been to China, and there are a lot of enlightened people who do think for themselves. So in that sense, it's in no way comparable to North Korea. However, I did see, especially in rural areas, there is absolutely a personality cult that's still promoted to this day around Mao. And what I find absolutely insufferable about communist arrogance, firstly, the people pushing it are not poor, ignorant peasants. Very often, these are pretty comfortable people, i.e., people who are reasonably well off, who have the ability to travel to other countries. And frankly, they have done well out of the Communist Party. So, in some ways, it's natural that they would defend the CCP because they themselves have done well out of it. I would play the devil's advocate and I would say, well, okay, they have lifted a lot of people out of poverty, but by refusing to admit their own crimes, by censoring their own history, the arrogance of that shouldn't be brushed under the carpet. And what I would say to those who say, oh, foreigners should mind their own business, etc., so long as there's a situation whereby you cannot talk about these things openly, candidly in China, they have to be discussed outside China. So, I am in no way xenophobic. I believe China is a wonderful country. It's been a very important country in my life, in fact, in more ways than one. But I cannot stand the arrogance of the Communist Party in censoring its past and then having the audacity to point fingers at other countries. I mean, they will vilify Japan, they will vilify the European countries, they will vilify America. They will never, ever admit their own faults in terms of history. And I think that's cowardly. And that isn't to say that Japan is innocent or Britain's innocent or other countries are innocent, but it just stinks of hypocrisy. So, you can point out all the things that the British Empire done wrong, but the point is this: we are honest and open about our past. Okay, you will get people defending it, and you'll get people who are making excuses for it. But the point is, there is a debate there. In China, there's no debate, no real debate. People will say, oh, there's hundreds of millions of internet users. But the point is, the Chinese internet it's still intensely controlled. I know this because the only way that you can access sites like Facebook in China is by getting software like VPNs. And the irony cannot be escaped that you get people defending the Communist Party on Facebook, defending the very party that believes this website is dangerous and therefore should be censored. And it's got nothing to do with protectionism. It's not a business issue, it's a politics issue. They know that there are groups on Facebook that advocate for human rights in China. There are groups on Facebook that believe Tibet should be independent and so on. So it's a threat. So they censor it. And the very same people who make excuses for them have no problem using Facebook to do so. And when you check out the profile of these people, they're usually living in, well, almost always living outside China. I've just looked at one guy who was basically whitewashing communist crimes. He's from Singapore, so Chinese Singaporean. But he was basically whitewashing red crimes. And, it's pathetic. That's what I despise most about communism, the dishonesty. I could say the cruelty. God knows there's an abundance of cruelty in communist history, but you get cruelty in capitalism as well. You get cruelty in colonialism. You get bloodletting in all those ideologies. But at least in capitalist countries, you don't get that same level of censorship, not on the same level. I mean, put it this way. The film Adam's Family Values had a scene, well-known scene, where Wednesday Adams, the daughter in the family, talks about how Native Americans were sent to reservations and persecuted and so on. This was in a mainstream Hollywood film. Now, that would be unthinkable for a mainstream Chinese film to openly talk about Mao's crimes in such a candid way. There have been films about the cultural revolution, but they've had to be very subtle in the way they go about it. So there is not artistic freedom in China. There is not journalistic freedom in China. And what I cannot stand is the utter hypocrisy of the nationalists who attack Western countries. Oh, they're perfectly happy to study here, but they attack Western countries whilst completely whitewashing communist crimes. I wouldn't even mind if they were attacking Western history, but they at least acknowledged that the Communist Party has also got a record. But it is an arrogant way that they pretend that the CCP has never done anything wrong. I find frankly disgusting. And I do have strong views on this because I've experienced both societies. I've lived in China. I had a very good experience, I have to say. I mean, most of the people I met were very decent people. So in no way do I want this to come across as xenophobic. But in terms of the Communist Party, I've no respect for the way in which they hide their own history. I mean, if the CCP is so innocent, why censor their history? Why? Common sense dictates that if you're innocent, you've got nothing to hide. So the apologists for the CCP, who will go out of their way to defend it and who will go out of their way to vilify Western governments or the Japanese government or any other government, but will stubbornly refuse to even try to comprehend. And I think there's psychology in this. It's classic tribal nationalism. It's about saving face. In Chinese culture, people don't like to lose face. So that means this notion that you're humiliated or you're put on the spot. So I think they believe that if they are honest about it, and this is the thing, if it was ignorance, you could forgive ignorance if people genuinely don't know any better. But I think deep down they know. They know. And that's what I find pretty despicable. The fact that they do know, but because they want to save face, and because the nationalistic pride gets in the way, they just won't acknowledge communist crimes. They won't acknowledge the millions of people hounded to death in the Cultural Revolution, driven to suicide, lynched. Nothing will ever convince me that whatever pros may have come from communism, that will ever justify the cons. Nothing will convince me of that. Anyway, I'll leave it there. This is a very vocal video. If you are, whether I leave the comment section open or not, I don't know yet, to be quite honest. If I do leave it open and I get nationalistic comments, all I would say is, again, frankly, you're just displaying your hypocrisy. You're using YouTube, blocked by the CCP, to defend the CCP. So I don't know if I'll let comments prevail on this one or not, because I don't want a situation where I'm giving a platform to people who are basically defending a regime that crushes free speech. I mean, that to me is not really something I want to do. But at the same time, maybe I want their arrogance to be exposed to show people what I'm talking about. Final word. Again, in no way am I talking about all Chinese people. I've known Chinese people who are open-minded and who have come here and they've agreed. They've basically said, yeah, they and they've told me things like, we were shocked when we found out how they hide our history. We feel betrayed. Of course, there's others that are too stubborn to do that, and they just hide behind a nationalistic pomp and arrogance. I'll leave it there. But I will say one thing. China's a powerful country, and it's a big economic power. And a lot of Western countries, especially the UK right now, are going out of their way to kind of basically kowtow to Beijing. Now, I think we need to be very careful with this. We can't ignore Beijing, and we certainly can't publicly, denounce Beijing, but we should be very careful. I mean, I really am a believer that we should have access to international students and so on. But I think we need to be careful with things like the Confucius Institute in British universities. I mean, if such programs are going to operate, that's fine, but we need to insist that it is in the UK. Therefore, there cannot be, for example, communist whitewashing. So, by all means, teach Chinese culture and so on, but there cannot be a situation where those Confucius institutes are used as basically a cover for promoting CCP propaganda. That Mao was a great man and no one should question him. So I've no problem with one point of view being promoted, so long as the other point of view is not silenced. And I am a little bit concerned that sometimes these programs can be used as a cover for their single party agenda.